Five Nights at Freddy's is a series that needs no introduction. The first Five Nights at Freddy's game was released in 2014 as a joke horror game by indie game developer Scott Cawthon. It was picked up by big names in the gaming space at the time like Markiplier and Jacksepticeye to name a few, and immediately became a smash hit across the board. To date, there are a total of 11 mainline FNAF games with 7 official spin-off games. But the series was so well received that Scott wrote books to go along with the games, and that's not to mention the plethora of merchandise ranging from action figures to wearable Freddy Fazbear mittens. Yes, those actually exist. But would you believe me if I said the series is on the decline? I can already hear you typing in the comments, how is that possible? They just released Secret of the Mimic this year. And yeah, they did. But who is they? It's not Scott Cawthon. They are Steel Wool, who Scott has shared the rights with his game series with. Steel Wool has developed nearly every FNAF game since 2019, starting with FNAF VR Help Wanted. Of course, this is to be expected. I mean, Scott was using Click Team for all the Freddy's games up until this point, and it's pretty safe to say that a fully 3D VR game was a little out of his wheelhouse. There's nothing inherently wrong with Scott giving a proper game studio the rights to his IP and having them develop the games for him. In fact, it's a smart thing to do when you're looking for the next evolution and how the series can continue for possibly another decade. But have you noticed what I have? With each game Steel Wool makes for the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, the less scary they get. What do I mean by this? Let's take some random examples. Let's compare FNAF 2 to FNAF Security Breach. Why these two games? FNAF 2 has a very diverse set of characters compared to the original, and the toy animatronics play nicely with the smoother style of Security Breach's designs. Really, we could pick any two games as long as we aren't comparing Help Wanted to anything, since those are straight up just 3D renders of the FNAF 1 through 5 animatronics. First things first, the models. Look at Toy Chica here. These soulless, robotic eyes, uncanny lack of a nose despite the humanoid form. Sure, the design is outdated, and practically everyone has seen it by now, and maybe it's just me, but I still find this design unsettling. Look at that posture. Upright, left arm extended, both the cupcake and the robot herself staring directly into your eyes. Almost like one of those paintings whose eyes follow you. Now for Glamrock Chica. Looking at the design like this in a still image, it keeps a lot of the uncanny valley from Toy Chica before. The creepy, wide eyes, the slack-jawed, almost hungry look on her face. The slight hunch as if she's preparing to lunge towards you. But then when you see her in game, it's a completely different story. She's no longer an unsettling still image, but a threat that chases you around the Fazbear Mega Pizzaplex. Now my computer can barely run the game at high settings, and it just completely ruins the illusion that Chica's actually supposed to be scary. The only real fears here are the loud clanking footsteps that always sound closer than they actually are, and the knowledge that when she finally catches you, you'll be jump scared. But isn't your expectation the same with FNAF 2? I mean, if you played the original game, and assuming you played until Night 5, most people will have gotten jump scared at least once by Foxy or Freddy. But the Click Team games were different. Of course, the player's expecting to get jump scared, but that's not where the main fear comes from in the older installments. The fear is the randomness. The bad luck, poor timing even, could be the culprit. The fear that if you make one wrong move, it's game over, or even if you play well, you could just lose. But a game over wasn't just a respawn in FNAF 1 and 2. The first game, well, I believe Phone Guy says it best.
If they happen to see you after hours, probably won't recognize you as a person. They'll most likely see you as a metal endoskeleton without its costume on. Now, since that's against the rules here at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, they'll probably try to forcefully stuff you inside a Freddy Fazbear suit. Now, that wouldn't be so bad if the suits themselves weren't filled with crossbeams, wires, and animatronic devices, especially around the facial area. So you can imagine how having your head forcefully pressed inside one of those could cause a bit of discomfort and death. The only parts of you that would likely see the light of day again would be your eyeballs and teeth that pop out the front of the mask.
And in FNAF 2, the death screen has you looking through a Freddy mask directly at Withered Freddy, a smug and sinister look on his animatronic face. What happens in Security Breach? The animatronic screams into your face and then it fades to static, before giving you a respawn button. There's no fear here, you're just startled. It's a cheap impulse you can't control as a result of the loud sound and sudden movement on the screen. I mean, can't these arguments apply to Scott's games too? Yes, of course they can. Jump scares are inherently cheap by design. But look at the difference between these two deaths.
This area is off limits.
Do you notice anything? In the FNAF 2 clip, I didn't expect the jump scare because it was preceded with dread. I didn't know when it would happen, but I knew it would happen or might happen eventually. The jump scare was still cheap, but the dread made it feel more enjoyable. You get more of a reward for getting jump scared because you had that massive buildup, resulting in a spike of fear and then a drop off. In the security breach clip, of course, the dread is still there. There's an enemy chasing you, and you have no idea if or when they will catch up to you and kill you, but I mean, I mentioned this before, but do you hear that? And the loud metal footsteps. The impulsive reaction from the jump scare is severely mitigated by these thunderous footsteps approaching whenever an animatronic is chasing you. There's no payoff, just a respawn. It makes the jump scare even worse than it already was. There's this fascinating video by YouTuber Design Frame which goes into immense detail regarding Security Breach's free Ruin DLC. It's about 3 hours long, but if you got time, it's an incredibly good watch. A lot of the psychological and physiological points are covered much better there, but for our purposes, this explanation is decent enough. Dread is the feeling you want to achieve with a horror game. It's what makes it scary. You don't want to push people to a point where they're so dreadful they literally refuse to play the game, but you also don't want them dreading so little that the game is no longer scary. There's a balance to be had, and different people have different limits. Take me, for example. FNAF 4 has permanently scarred me for life. I was never truly afraid of the games before the 4th installment, as I could easily pass them off as fiction and not real in my child brain. But 4 broke me. I'd watch gameplay videos on my cheap LG tablet in the dead of night and fear monsters coming from my closet. It was horrifying. But as I got older, I knew the specific FNAF monsters weren't real, despite the game having a very, very similar bedroom to my own at the time. But that fear of what could be in the dark never went away. I continue to, even today, fear what could be lurking beyond my vision, even if I know it's completely safe. When I bought my VR headset in 2022, one of the games I was most excited to play was FNAF VR Help Wanted. It was scary, sure, but nothing got to me too bad until FNAF 4. I was paralyzed with fear. I believe I was streaming at some point in 2023. I'll try to find the clip if I can. A flat image does not do the fear justice. In full 3D, this was horrific. Felt like I was back in my old bedroom, or at least a bedroom that wasn't mine, but that was certainly real. Felt like the monster was going to kill me, even though I knew it wouldn't. I don't fault Steel Wool for that. They just took the gameplay from the game I was already afraid of. Despite what it may seem, I do like horror as a genre. My favorite horror story of all time is Stephen King's It. Albeit I was 13 when I first read it, and a lot of the details are fuzzy, but I remember it being a great read. Though if we stretch the definition of horror just a little, my true favorites would be H.P. Lovecraft's The Dream Quest of the Unknown Kadath and H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. Truly amazing. But that's besides the point. I didn't get through Security Breach, I didn't finish Ruin, and I certainly didn't buy Secret of the Mimic. The gameplay itself did not interest me. The story took leaps that I didn't feel fit the existing narrative Scott had been drip-feeding the theorists for years, so my only stake in it was for the horror. And quite simply, the games weren't scary. Okay, so if I haven't played Secret of the Mimic, then what else have I played by Stillwell? Well, as previously mentioned, I played Help Wanted 1, and on stream, actually, I believe I played Help Wanted 2, or at the very least, I recorded it at some point. And let me tell you that this game is not scary. I would be shocked if the second game was actually trying to be. Help Wanted 2 is my favorite VR game to date. It's a bunch of well-designed minigames with relatively low stakes and just pure fun. The only scary parts are assuming that when you're in a dark room, something could be watching you from just beyond your view, but nothing is. And it goes back to that personal fear that I was talking about before. It's just my own flaws. But maybe that's the point. Maybe Steelwool is trying to make their games less scary, or at least toning it down out of the dead kids stuffed into robot suits and now seemingly possessing them more towards, well, look at this quirky robot that mimics kids that were neglected by their fathers. I mean, what reason would they have to do this? It's obvious, isn't it? Money. FNAF is incredibly lucrative. Between the games, the novels, comic books, and the vast library of merch, Five Nights at Freddy's is undeniably successful. Fan art has been created en masse since the very first game in 2014. It's a resounding success, but it especially is with kids. When the games first came out, they were sort of a gray area for kids. YouTubers that swore played the games. But they weren't bloody or violent, so surely kids were okay to watch and play them, right? It was unclear. I feel like it still is. I'm sure Scott never imagined the original Five Nights at Freddy's to get as immensely popular as it is, and by proxy never imagined so many kids would grow up with it. But as kids get older, new kids come to fill in the place of the old. I think the beginning of the shift towards child-friendliness began with Sister Location. I'm sure there are fans of this game out there, but I've yet to encounter any myself. For me, Sister Location was a disappointment. It felt more like an interactive movie than a game you actually have control over the outcome towards. But just look at these characters. They definitely keep that same Scott Cawthon uncanny creepiness, but they're much smoother than the previous designs. Sleeker. Like the toy animatronics weren't plastic enough for Scott, and he had to dip these things in industrial plastic molding equipment. Most of the fear associated with these designs comes from the moving faceplates that expose the endoskeleton underneath in an horrific animalistic way. And of course, the scale of these robots. These things are absolutely massive, easily 6 or 7 feet tall. Sister Location came out after FNAF World, which chibiized every FNAF animatronic and new ones for a spin-off RPG game. FNAF World was fine with having the cutesy style because it was no different from a Final Fantasy or Pokemon with the cute vibes and fun RPG mechanics. But for a mainline FNAF game, it wasn't the same level of fear anymore. It was different. I wouldn't say lesser, but definitely a trend in the wrong direction. But that was the last proper FNAF game Scott ever made. Of course, I'm omitting Pizza Sim and Ultimate Custom Night, but the former was just odd and out of place, and Custom Night was exactly as the name implies. It's a custom night to end all FNAF custom nights. It combines the best and worst animatronics from all the previous games, adds some new ones, and gives everything a fresh take in one ultimate test of survival. One of the only games I haven't mentioned up to this point is FNAF Into the Pit, but that's an arcade-style game that really just parrots the events from the novel it's based on. From what I've heard, it's a great game, but again, it's not scary, and it's not trying to be. So what's next? What's the takeaway from all this? I firmly believe that FNAF as a series is heading in the wrong direction. By pandering to a younger audience, it's isolating the fans that grew up on the series over a decade ago. I've heard from several people over the years that they're embarrassed to be a FNAF fan, and I would honestly say that I am too. I was an avid fan of The Game Theorists. I got into Matthew Patrick's videos through his Pokemon and Earthbound theories for how zany yet plausible they were, but his theories only got more and more solid as time went on. By the time FNAF released and MatPat produced a theory, it was plausible. Not likely in hindsight, but plausible. I was hooked. Other than my classmates, it was The Game Theorists that got me into Five Nights at Freddy's. I watched every theory, often more than once, within a few days of posting. But things started to get stale after UCN. It felt like the story was complete. It was evident that Scott had retconned and rewrote the canon in his later installments, in some cases to directly align with the theories, and in other cases to oppose them. But for whatever reason, the books kept coming. Survival Logbook, The Fourth Closet, Tales from the Pizzaplex. What was happening? The series, which theorists admitted had plot holes, just kept going and going and going, filling in holes in some areas but poking new ones in others. It was disappointing. It was a decline from the on-the-fly adaptation that Scott had been forced to adopt in order to form a cohesive, albeit difficult to follow narrative with his games. It felt forced. Like someone kept pushing and pushing for specific answers, and with the books, they got the answers they wanted at the cost of muddying the water. With each book came more dirt to shovel into the pond. After Steel Wool took over, it's like the series took an entirely different direction. To me, Gregory has seemingly no correlation with anyone from the Scott-made games. What relevance does Glitch Trap have with Balloon Boy? What happened to the puppet? Were they retconned to become Sun and Moon? What happened to fun and experimental designs like Mangle and a literal man rotting inside a suit in the form of Springtrap? It's also sterile now, designed for easy toy manufacturing, easy to recognize merchandise. Kids will point to it in your local Target, Walmart, Hot Topic even, and say, "Look, Mommy, it's Freddy," while pointing at a glam rock Freddy action figure sitting on the shelf right next to Monty Gator and Roxy Wolf. It's upsetting. It's concerning. It's disappointing. I implore you to do your own research, come to your own conclusions, but as for me, I don't think I'll be purchasing any FNAF games anytime in the future if this trend continues. All good things must end eventually, and we can only hold out hope that FNAF doesn't fizzle out, but instead goes out with a bite.
Was that the bite of 87?
What's that supposed to mean? Was that the bite of 87?